Hello and welcome all back to Election Time News, Australia. Today is Friday, August 1st, 2025, and today we'll be looking at the results of the Tasmania statewide election for 2025 that happened at the uh, middle of the month, last month now, that's gonna be now 13 days ago. I'm going to be looking at what happened with the vote and some other interesting statistics regarding that as well. Election Time News, your one stop for all things elections and politics, from summations to poll reviews and news. Subscribe below for more content like this about American, Canadian, and Australian elections. Also, make sure to follow the Substack, Threads, Instagram, and X. We do all of the we keep you up to date on election news for all three countries on on all of those platforms, so you're up to date on everything happening. Remember, there's never a dull moment in politics. So now we have nothing here. That's annoying. All right, so what we have to start off here is the Wikipedia page. Obviously, we're at 90.1% of the vote counted, but we basically have every single seat is certain except for um, two are still in theory in doubt, but they have been for a while, and um, they're still somewhat generally, you can tell who's most likely going to win. So, to start things off, based on the projection here, obviously the Liberals didn't end up gaining a seat, rather than expected to gain one. The Labor is actually expected to gain one. We'll get to that in a bit. Green actually did end up keeping all five. Those because they didn't show any Green candidates in the polling on the Wikipedia page. Nationals didn't gain any. They lost their two, but that was because they only had two. They were part of the Nationals because of the Liberal National Coalition. The SFF is actually expected to gain a seat now. We'll get to that in a minute. And the Independents actually aren't going to be gaining any seats. That's again just because of the missed Green candidates and now the SFF candidate as well. So most likely, in the end, we're gonna end up seeing 14 to 11 to okay, no idea, to 5 to 0 to 1, and then obviously as a result, that's just gonna be okay, yeah. That's just gonna end up being I think that's literally just gonna be 3 as well. It's gonna stay 3. Trying to do this quick math here, it's not going very well. So pretty sure actually gonna be 4. No, they're not all up. Anyway, so basically we have here is going to be no gained seats for the Liberals. They're going to be doing okay so far. So to start things off, total right now we have 4 for others. So that's going to end up being all right. Here we go. Others is going to be 4, but that's of course not including the one there. So that's going to end up being 4. Yes. So okay, there we go. All right, 14 to 11 to 5 to 0 to 1 to 4. And so if we look at the SFF is probably going to end up gaining a seat. The Nationals aren't going to end up getting any for independents. Okay, perfect. So there we go. All right. So now we're looking at start things off in batch. We're going to just go in alphabetical order here. The first few were pretty easy to be able to predict. Archer got number 1. That was pretty easy. Elected there. Then was in fact Finley, then Ferguson to start things off. Didn't have any Green candidates, but Rosal did end up getting 4th place. Look at more, get more detail. There we go. Quite a bit of the vote there. 1.5 quotas all the way down to 1 still for those two. Very easy. All 4 of these candidates here, Finley, Ferguson, Rosal, Ferris, were all reelected to their seats there. But Pentland did lose re-election there. If we look down, I believe most likely they're going to be Lambie Network. Yep, became an independent, did lose re-election there. Gained 3.8% of the vote in a swing here. That's actually quite a bit of an overperformance from the expected. Labor lost 2.3%. Greens only gained 4.5. That's a bit less than expected, but they did still gain here a good bit. Independents got 3.3 plus 4, so expected to only get 3. Nationals got 2%. I expected 3.1. And then SFF 1.7, but it doesn't really matter much, but 1.7% swing towards them, which was definitely not expected. And the other votes basically non existent. So that doesn't mean that actually is going to end up being 3 so far. We have all of our. O'Byrne did retire, so that's why MP 0. Um, but we do still have 2 Labor candidates that are, as of right now, they are basically neck and neck. But if one of them ends up losing, the other one's going to basically end up getting another fair share of the votes to be able to most likely toss out these 2 candidates that are leading them. So that's going to be the main question there, is how much cross voting is there going to be. But there hasn't been that much counting going on recently. We're still looking at Monday, so definitely going to need to wait a little while longer. But Labor is going to end up getting that seat, which means that they will end up gaining 1 seat in the end. So they are going to end up having 11 there, which is going to end up gaining them 1 seat, which really isn't going to mean that much. They're going to be getting one from the network, most likely. Is going to be what they're going to be. Yeah, 3 seats. So that's going to be most likely where that one is coming from. Then we go over to Braddon, where we have all the candidates are up. Rockcliffe easily leading, 31.5% of the vote, 2.5 quotas worth. Helped Pierce and Ellis get reelected and elected. Garland easily got himself to a reelection. Dow and Broad here as well, and then Janch. But Beswick did get defeated. National, not part of the coalition anymore. That's going to definitely impact things there. But there's no changes here whatsoever that might have been expected. Didn't have any changes either, but the popular vote definitely did switch a little bit. The Liberal Party did actually end up gaining a good bit of the vote in Braddon. Labor lost by a point, so again, that's going to be a bit of a difference. The Greens barely gained. Independents gained a lot, though, but not close to as much as I had expected here. 10.6% gain, not even that close. So that's quite a bit of an error as far as that goes. But looking at the general share in Clark, we have 2 Green candidates that weren't on the board. This was the one that did have them on the board. Johnson easily carrying to re-election as first place. Then we actually had Vermi. Burnett was actually all the way down at the 6th spot. Bailey actually pulled ahead there. We have Willie down here, Haddad up here, but I'm pretty sure I did actually get, no. Ogilvy actually did end up getting on the list. So, not 100% sure where Baracus was defeated. So that actually is going to end up being thing there. Ogilvy was reelected. Baracus was defeated. So I misread that. So that's swapping out with Ogilvy. Other than that, I got every single other candidate right. The placements were a bit off, but it is still going to be 2 to 2 to 2 to 0 to 1. Basically no change in Clark. Even after the long season of campaigning, going into Franklin. Next, we're looking at, George getting easily reelected here. O'Byrne getting reelected, but 4th place. Winter got actually ended up getting 3rd, and Abbott's getting 2nd. So again, more overperformance for the Liberals than expected. That was definitely going to end up benefiting them there. Patrisma got reelected, but Street got defeated. So that's going to be difficulty there. Did have that expected, though. Brown did get reelected, and beat somewhat narrowly. Woodruff got reelected. I didn't have that on there, so that's where I believe. No, Patrisma I had on there, so I'm not 100% sure where they went. But 0.3% swing gain here in Franklin. I expected a loss for both parties, but only Labor's party's loss was actually relatively accurate. But George Group 17-point swing. That's kind of just towards. I had that just independence 23-point swing towards the independence. That actually ended up being relatively accurate. Tasmanian Greens actually lost a lot of the vote. 8.2-point loss there is actually relatively accurate. Nothing for the Nationals, or for the or for anyone else. So that's really just the general shares there. And then finally with Lions, this is the one with the last seat that's not 100% certain, but most likely it's going to be DeFalco, who is of the SFF, Shooters Farmers Fishers Party. Farrell got defeated to probably flip this seat here. Most likely DeFalco is going to end up winning. There's not really anyone that's that close to him. Even with those transfer votes, it's really not going to do that much. You only have 0.28. That would be just under 0.6, and he's at 0.54. So that's why it's not determined yet. But there's definitely still enough that he could end up losing, but chances are that he's probably going to end up winning this seat, which actually would give SFF one seat there, which would obviously change things a little bit. You're going to have to cooperate with another party. If you are the Liberal Party, you're going to have to get on with SFF as well now in order to form government. If you're Labor trying to make an opposition again, then you're going to have to re-ally with the Greens as well as now the SFF and basically every single independent. So it's going to make things a bit more complicated for forming government. But we're looking now at Barnett and Howlett taking the lead. Butler underperformed a little bit. So, quite a bit less, actually, around 3,000 votes less than expected. Mitchell also doing worse. Badger wasn't on the list there, so that was kind of unpredictable as far as that goes. Shelton on there as well. Offord and Cameron didn't make it. There's Cameron, who was basically right behind, so it wasn't necessarily inaccurate as far as that goes. Just didn't see Badger on the list in the first place. I'm going to stop using Wikipedia because apparently they don't show everything, but... And then if you look for Offord, I'm not 100% sure where Offord ended up being. Maybe I misread it. I'm not 100% sure. But DeFalco is going to most likely end up taking that seat, which means that, again, in the end, it's going to end up being 14 to 11 to 5 to 0 to 1 to 4, which is definitely going to make things a bit more interesting. We're going to have to see how that goes in general, but... that's really going to be the question as far as that goes. So I'm going to keep updating in the posts and stuff of how the live results are going. Still, there's going to be more questions about that, but mainly what we saw here is we're going to be looking at the swings in general. Liberal Party. Let's actually look at the polling for what was expected here. If we look at the opinion polling for the actual, there, okay. If we look at the polling here, you can actually see the comparison. So, we're looking at quite a few trends, especially against YouGov, who is relatively accurate for the national election in 2025. Who actually somewhat saw the overperformance of the Labor Party. They kind of fell short here, especially in quite a few regions. YouGov here for their last poll at 31 to 30, ended up being 40 to 26 as of right now. They definitely got quite a bit off. Margin of error 3.2%. That's definitely going to hurt. Demos AU even had an under expectation of what was going to happen here for the Liberals. They definitely overperformed. The best that they got was EMRS here, 37%. Mid-July, only 500, which is really interesting considering that's a really small sample size, but 37 to 26 twice, and then 14% for the Greens. That's pretty accurate, honestly, almost on point as far as nationwide goes. It is really interesting considering that's such a small sample size compared to Demos AU's comparatively monstrous sized polls, and then winning 34 to 27.3. That's not that bad for the Labor Party. Not that poor for the Greens, a bit of an over expectation for the Nationals. SFF is pretty accurate, but under expectation for the Liberal Party, expected a bit more for the Independents than it actually ended up being. EMRS coming in here and over expecting a little bit for the Nationals, didn't pull for the SFF. That's going to hurt a bit. That's probably where a bit of that national vote ended up going. Over expectations for the Independents, but other than that, they basically nailed these three numbers for the main. Right here, they nailed these three numbers for the main three parties, and then the Independents they underballed it a little bit. But looking at the overall numbers here, Demos AU generally being relatively accurate as far as this goes. They over expected for green, obviously by quite a bit. So that's going to definitely impact things. They said Nationals. They actually basically didn't feel any. Open up the page here for the actual numbers per each. Okay, for Bass, we're gonna look at Bass first. Again, going in order. 37.6% for that overall. That's going to be 41. That's definitely a bit of an underperformance there, under expectation there. YouGov 36 is actually even worse. They ended up gaining an entire 3.8%. That wasn't necessarily seen. It was expected generally that they would lose vote as well. They also the Labor Party lost a bit. They only got 27.5% of the vote. That's actually on point there for the late June poll by Demos AU, but they only had 33.5%. So this one's going to be more accurate in general because they got a lot closer for the Liberals. The Green Party ended up getting 16.5% of the vote. That's a bit closer here, but somewhere in that ballpark is relatively okay. 16.5 is within the margin of error. So far, actually, I think that 41.8. Yeah, this is actually so far entirely in the margin of error for Demos AU's final poll. So that's looking great for them so far. And you look at the Nationals, they ended up getting 2%. That is still within the margin of error there. SFF, we ended up getting 4.1%. That's also within it. And then the Independents ended up getting only 7%. So that's going to hurt a little bit there. That's outside of it, but the main five are all within the margin of error. So Demos AU did do their work as a polling firm for the Bass election. They got all five within the margin of error. Moving on to Braddon, we're going to be looking at the general polling here. As of right now, of course, we're looking at, but there's probably not going to be too much of an adjustment. Updated Tuesday at 11:10 a.m. We're going to be looking next at the, there we go. Liberal Party got almost half of the vote. No one really expected that. That's a 5-point swing to get half the vote. They kind of all underballed it here. Demos AU only had 41%, 44% in late June. The highest one we had was 44%, and then you ended up having 23.7%, which is relatively accurate for the number right here as well, but that's outside of the margin of error there. The Greens ended up getting 7.4%. That's quite a bit of an under performance there. YouGov is actually the most accurate as far as that goes, but they definitely undershot for the if the Labor Party was only losing to the Liberals by 1 percentage point in Braddon, then they were gonna probably storm across the entire state. But they basically did end up doing okay. The Greens basically collapsed compared to what was expected, except it actually was still a swing towards them. So it was still a stronger performance than expected. But Nationals only got 1.6% of the vote. That's definitely an undershot. Definitely means that the Liberals actually ended up coalescing more support than was expected. If you end up adding together the 2.6 to this number here, 46.6, that means that you would actually end up being within the margin of error. And the SFF only getting 1.8%. They did end up overperforming that by almost getting twice that. Independents together ended up getting 10.2. That's 14.4, 15, 16.1. So that's not that bad for this Demos AU poll. The one at the end of June was relatively accurate as far as some of those numbers go. But The one in early July was kind of an undershot. Kind of said that it was kind of closing. It was dropping for both main parties, and most of the more support was actually going to the Greens and the Nationals, especially Independents. But that ended up falling short, and they did actually end up reverting back to voting a lot more for the Liberal Party, which they did end up coalescing a lot of support. Most likely, we'll have to see a lot of those more exit polls are going to get weighted a bit more as time goes on, but we'll eventually get to see some of those numbers. In Clark, we do have another interesting story. Christy Johnson obviously leading, but the Liberal Party did gain here too, 30.6%. They actually beat out the Labor Party this time, even though the Labor Party beat the Liberals by quite a bit last time. The Liberals won the popular vote in each and every region in every single electorate in the entire state. So that's definitely a sign, but 30.6% here. No one had it that much. The Liberals actually did win in the final Demos AU poll for the popular vote. 25.6, that's also within the margin of error, 5.1%. 22.1, that's actually pretty on point for both Demos AU polls, which both had 22.7% right there. The Independents actually won both of these other ones, but that's mostly because of just of Christy Johnston alone. Archer ended up getting 3.3% ungrouped, so that together is a 18, 19. That's just under 20. So they definitely ended up underperforming there. The independent collapse over time is definitely relatively accurate as far as that goes. Was still a bit worse than was expected here at 22.4, which kind of like which still showed more of a collapse, so actually did end up being a bit more accurate, but still not that strong of a performance there from the independents. Ended up going a lot more towards the Labor Party. They ended up basically blowing up everywhere. And then you go down to Franklin, where we have of course, another overperformance by the Liberals. But the YouGov poll had Labor winning in Franklin, but then both Demos AU polls had Liberals leading, but the Independents actually ended up winning the popular vote there. Now 17.1, and that's going to be 28.4, and that's going to be 29.3. So 29.3, that's actually worse than the Liberal Party ended up doing. So that's definitely an overperformance for the independents from those Demos AU polls. Um, so that's going to be a bit of a blow for the polling there as far as polling integrity goes. 31.7% and doing 34.4. It's still within the margin of error. 22.4 was actually pretty accurate as far as that goes. YouGov basically completely dropped the ball on this one. 10.7 and 12.9, both of those are okay. They actually ended up overperforming a bit. The Greens definitely did do some gains in Franklin compared to what was expected. They did actually still lose 6.3%, but they were expected to lose even more, so they managed to hold on with Woodruff managing to get enough of the vote there to be able to hold on to a bit of the statewide vote in general. So that's a bit of a good sign for the Greens. They're not collapsing too much, even when the Labor Party is definitely suffering. Um, and then that's basically it as far as that goes. The independents ended up taking the rest of it, but they actually did end up losing the popular vote to the Liberal Party, even though it was expected, even by Demos AU, that the independents would end up winning by not even that much. But it could be seen that potentially the Liberals would end up beating the independents, because considering that trend, they lost 0.2% there, but they gained 2. It could be kind of seen that by the end of the month or whatever, that they would end up potentially losing that. But finally up in Lions, we do still basically have the open thing. Most likely SFF's going to end up winning that seat, but it's not entirely certain. But we do still have the fact that SFF in this poll was actually expected to get 7% of the vote, and they ended up getting 6.7%. So that definitely was in the wrong direction going into the one right at the very end of the season. But 42% was definitely an overperformance. YouGov with their poll in the end of June had it tied at 34%, ended up being 42 to 28, which just shows really how YouGov basically completely flopped this time. With ridiculously small sample sizes as well, but 35.5% here. That's still a 7-point underperformance, under prediction there. So that's actually outside of the margin of error. 28.4. That's a bit more on point there. The Greens actually gained a good bit, not as much as was expected. 13.1 for the one in late June. For what I'm seeing so far, the ones in late June actually ended up being more accurate for the final election than the ones that were released right before Election Day by Demos AU. But 13.1%. You end up having the Nationals actually getting 4.2%. That's also closer to the one in late June. SFF ended up getting 6.7%. That's closer to 7. And the Independents together, you ended up having just over 5.1%. So that's definitely a bit less than was expected from either of these other ones. 11.8 and 15% were definitely ended up the Labor Party definitely ended up completely dropping the ball this election. Not quite as poor as this final poll was, but the Labor Party actually ended up gaining a lot more. Tasmanian Greens ended up suffering towards the Liberals from what was expected to the polls. The Greens ended up not gaining as much, but they just ended up getting 2.7%. That's good news for Badger being able to get in as number 4. Most likely number 4. She might end up passing to number 3 or getting passed, most likely passed to number 5. Depending on how many more Labor votes from Farrell end up getting poured into Mitchell. Considering that he's still in, though, doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be that much. And then, but DeFalco still waiting on that. Shelton reelected, so that's really going to end up being the end of this. There still might be a few more things that are going to be changing. We're going to have to wait out for the in general the comparison, get some exit poll numbers, but in the end you still ended up having the fact that Rockcliffe was, as the incumbent, still beating Winter basically every single poll except for the one in YouGov, where they did push unsureds, so that did potentially harm things as well. I'm not 100% sure how how they did on all of the other polls as well, but their methodology obviously wasn't too strong because they basically completely dropped it everywhere. It was basically going with that the Liberals will only win by 1 percentage point, but as of right now, they are ahead by 14, and two-party preferred, which obviously isn't even actually done. They don't. They had the Liberals winning by 10, even though there really wasn't any actual two-party preferred count actually taking place. So, but after all that, it basically is determined that the Liberals are basically not completely out of the game by any means. As it should be expected, the national collapse of the coalition didn't doom the Liberal Party. The Nationals, basically, it did. Because they literally just ended up gaining only 1.6% of the vote there. That's all of it is a shift, but they really did. 1.6% really isn't going to do much. The Greens only gained half a percentage point. Others actually lost a good bit, but SFF actually gained half a percentage point. That's basically almost entirely out of the seat in Lions, where we're still awaiting that call right there. But and I mean the Nationals only gained 1.6% of the vote, only 5,500 votes there. But Liberals did end up basically completely climbing up entirely, and the Labor Party actually probably will still end up winning a seat, gaining a seat from the 2024. But they also will have to include in the SFF, as they are likely going to be able to win a seat out of that as well. So that is, ooh, that is still going to be a bit more difficult for the formation of government that is going to end up having to come out of this, where we're going to have a courting the crossbenchers for support right now, after Winter did concede for the overall. He did concede that it was general loss, but he did not concede for the government as a whole, saying that if he would negotiate with crossbenchers to form a labor-led minority government, which he generally originally said he'd refuse to form a government with the Greens. If we end up looking at the share right now, we can see if we quickly pull up the expected and quickly make a graph, it'll show up. That's fine. There we go. If you end up looking at the general thing and fix the color so that it looks better, then you end up showing that it's that's the liberals we're gonna be looking at. Then we have labor. This is green. This is the Greens. This is the Nationals. This is the SFF. And this is Independence. So I guess it can kind of stay teal because, teal independence. But basically, we have going on here is if he's not going to be forming any government with the Greens, then he doesn't have enough. If you try to move these over, you end up only having this plus the Greens is definitely enough to end up forming government. So that's going to be 19 seats. If you look here, the end result is going to end up being you need 18, so that's going to be one more. So if he's going to end up forming government, that means that he definitely is going to end up having to form government with the he's going to definitely have to form government with the help of the Greens, which means that he is going to end up having to go back on his original statements. But if he does end up, there we go. If he does end up doing that, then he's gonna end. He's definitely gonna end up. It's not sure going to harm anything, but that's going to make it a bit more volatile of a government. Because if you end up having a likely 7 seat in Lions, considered a conservative with DeFalco, pro stadium progressive with O'Byrne, progressive, the 5 seats to the Greens. So that's going to end up being how they're going to hold things together. But if they end up really, and they don't have to worry about the JLN anymore because they all lost. Everyone who was contesting had lost, so that's going to end up making things a bit easier. But I end up looking at the two combined together, and you then you can see that that's more than the general that you could coalesce together. So that's really going to be the I'm not sure how I can get it to anyway. It's going to be a bit difficult for that because then, of course, if they don't have a majority government, you can see that the Liberals are outnumbered. Either it's going to be a minority Liberal government, they could get all of the independents on board, and that would be basically split. That'd be 18 to 17. That would be enough to get a majority, or the Labor Party could end up getting enough independents on there, plus potentially work the SFF, even though it's likely going to go with the Liberals. Then they end up having to get enough of the independents in order to be able to get that together. So it's going to be an interesting thing to watch the government end up getting formed here. But if the Labor Party does end up actually getting a minority government, that's going to end up being very volatile, considering they're not all in one party, and they could end up then forming a vote of no confidence with the Liberals, which means that they're actually going to be the ones that have the power, not the Labor Party. So there's going to be a lot of dynamics going on there. That's going to be interesting to watch over the next few days as we also officially see the final results coming in. We'll have to see if SFF does actually end up winning that final seat, as well as if which of those two candidates is going to end up winning the seat for Labor in Bass, which is going to make things a bit easier for Labor, considering they are going to most likely gain a seat there in total. But that is basically the end of that. So thank you all so much for watching, and have a fantastic rest of your day.